All right, let's dive in. Today we're cracking open this book, Quranic Lessons from Destroyed Nations.
Okay.
And I think this is going to be really interesting because it's kind of like if you could look back at history and see all the big mistakes that people made and learn from them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like having a cheat sheet, but a cheat sheet to not messing up.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
And it's really about looking at these civilizations, some of which were incredibly advanced,
Yeah.
really ahead of their time, but they ultimately crumbled.
Yeah, and I think the Quran has a really unique perspective on this. It's not just a historical account,
Right.
but it really delves into the why did these societies fall apart? And I think there's some really surprising lessons
Yeah.
that we can apply today.
Absolutely. And one of the first lessons that we'll look at is the danger of arrogance and pride. And the Quran tells the story of the people of Adu who were known for their amazing architecture, almost like skyscrapers.
Wait, skyscrapers back then?
Yeah. Yeah, they were builders like you wouldn't believe.
Wow.
But the issue is that they became so proud of their accomplishments that they kind of forgot where those blessings came from.
It's almost like they looked up at those huge buildings
Mhm.
and forgot to look inward.
Right.
Yeah, and we see this even today, right?
Absolutely.
Like companies or even individuals,
Yeah.
they achieve a certain level of success,
Right.
and then they kind of implode.
It's that forgetting where you came from.
Yeah,
Kind of forgetting that, you're not the sole source of your success.
right.
There are other factors at play.
So how do we stay grounded then?
Well, I think humility is a big part of it, recognizing that
Yeah,
our talents, our opportunities, even our luck, those all play a role in
Yeah.
our success. And it's about staying open to learning,
okay.
not being afraid to admit when we're wrong.
So it's not about downplaying our accomplishments. It's more about just recognizing the bigger picture. Got it. Okay, well, that's a good starting point. And I think this next story is really interesting, too, because it deals with honesty, especially in business.
Yeah,
And I think we've all encountered this in some way or another.
absolutely.
The people of Madian, right? They were notorious for basically being dishonest in their dealings,
Yeah.
like rigging scales.
Yeah, they were like the masters of deception
Yeah.
when it came to business.
And it wasn't just a few bad apples.
No, it was like ingrained in their culture.
It was systemic,
It was like they believed that they could build a whole society on dishonesty.
which is just crazy when you think about it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, haven't we learned by now that
Right.
ethical behavior is actually good for business in the long run?
Well, that's the thing. Trust is so fundamental to
Yeah.
a thriving economy. When you lose that trust,
Yeah.
the whole system starts to crumble.
It's building a house on sand.
So,
Not
like,
going to last.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not just about being honest in our individual transactions. Right.
It's about creating a culture of integrity.
Okay, yeah. So honesty isn't just a personal virtue. It's actually like a societal necessity.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, this next story is a little bit more
Sensitive.
sensitive. Yeah.
Yeah.
The story of Luted, and I know this can be a difficult topic.
Yeah.
But the Qur'an addresses it pretty directly.
Uh-huh.
And it talks about the destruction of his people for engaging in widespread immorality.
Right. And it's important to approach this story, with sensitivity,
Yeah,
recognizing that there are different interpretations and perspectives.
absolutely.
But within the context of the Quran, this destruction is presented as a direct consequence of their actions and their rejection of the prophet's message.
So it seems like this story is about more than just specific actions, right?
Yeah.
It's about the role of morality in society.
Exactly like what happens when a society starts to abandon its core values and principles.
Right. And every society has those, right?
They do.
Some kind of moral code.
Absolutely.
So it's asking us to think about what happens when those boundaries are blurred
Right.
or completely ignored.
It's a challenging story, but it raises some really profound questions.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll delve into even more stories from Quranic Lessons from Destroyed Nations.
Sounds good.
And we're back with more from Quranic Lessons from Destroyed Nations. It's amazing how these stories, they just speak to us even though they're so old.
Yeah, it's like human nature hasn't really changed that much,
Right, the patterns repeat themselves.
Yeah, and one pattern that keeps coming up is this danger of ignoring wise counsel.
Oh, absolutely, like the story of Noah's Ark.
Yeah.
which is probably familiar to most people.
Yeah.
But it's more than just, a simple flood narrative.
Right.
Yeah.
It's about why people refuse to listen.
Exactly. It's about that rejection of truth, even when it's presented with love and concern.
Yeah. Noah was trying to warn his people, but they just wouldn't listen.
Right. And the Qur'an talks about this as prophet fatigue,
Oh,
where
interesting.
people get tired of hearing the same message.
I can relate to that.
Yeah, even if it's true.
It's like hitting the snooze button on important advice.
Exactly.
But in Noah's case, the consequences were pretty dire.
Yeah. And we see this today too, right?
Oh,
like
yeah.
people who ignore climate change warnings or health warnings.
Yeah.
It's like, at what point do we become so stuck in our own beliefs
Right.
that we can't even see the truth?
Yeah. So being open-minded, being willing to question our own assumptions, that's crucial.
Absolutely. Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about those who actively oppress others.
Okay.
Because the Quran also has stories about that, like the story of Pharaoh.
Pharaoh, yeah, the classic tyrant.
Yeah, enslaving the Israelites, declaring himself a god.
I mean, talk about an ego trip.
Right, but it didn't end well for him, did it?
No, not at all. But I think it's interesting that the Quran presents his downfall as more than just a military defeat. It's like his whole system was corrupt.
Right, his power was built on injustice.
Yeah, and that kind of power, it's always unstable.
It's unsustainable. It's like a house of cards. Eventually, it's going to collapse.
So we need to be vigilant about oppression in all its forms, right?
Absolutely. Not just the blatant kind, but also the more subtle kind.
Okay, so we've talked about arrogance, we've talked about dishonesty, we've talked about oppression.
Yeah.
Is there like a common thread here, a single lesson that ties all these stories together?
I think there is, and it's gratitude. The story of the Saba people really highlights this.
Oh, yeah, the Saba people, they were like super prosperous, right?
They had everything, lush gardens, advanced technology. It was like paradise.
But they took it for granted.
They did. They became complacent. They forgot to be thankful.
And then a flood wiped them out.
Yeah. It's a powerful reminder that blessings can disappear just as quickly as they appear.
It's like that saying, you don't know what you've got till it's gone.
Exactly. And this story speaks to the dangers of entitlement. When we lose sight of what we have, we become vulnerable.
Okay, so cultivating gratitude, that's key.
It's essential.
But how do we do that in a world that's constantly telling us to want more?
It's about shifting our focus,
Okay.
focusing on what we have instead of what we lack.
So appreciating the little things.
Absolutely. And recognizing that our well-being depends on so much more than just ourselves.
It's about recognizing that interconnectedness.
Exactly. And expressing gratitude, not just in words, but in actions.
Okay, so gratitude isn't just a feeling, it's a way of life.
It is. It's a way of being in the world.
And it can actually make us more resilient.
Absolutely. And as we continue to explore these Quranic lessons, we'll see how this theme of interconnectedness and the impact of our choices, it really plays out in some profound ways.
Back again with more from Quranic Lessons from Destroyed Nations. It's really been an eye-opening look at history and human nature.
Yeah, it's like looking in a mirror, isn't it? Seeing those patterns that lead to success and failure.
Definitely. And one thing that keeps coming up is this idea of not blindly following tradition or the crowd.
Oh, absolutely.
It seems like so many of these civilizations that fell apart, they were stuck in the ways of the past.
Yeah, they were clinging to what their ancestors did, even when it was clearly not working anymore.
Right. And the Quran really emphasizes critical thinking, right?
It does. It's about examining our beliefs and traditions and understanding why we hold them.
Not just accepting them, because that's how it's always been done.
Exactly. It's like inheriting a recipe that calls for a cup of dirt. You don't just blindly follow it, you question it.
Right. You ask, why is there dirt in this cake?
Exactly. Maybe it made sense at some point, but times change.
Yeah, we got to adapt.
So we need to be willing to challenge assumptions and be open to new ways of thinking.
Especially now when we're bombarded with so much information.
Right. It's about sifting through the noise and making informed decisions.
So what are some of those cups of dirt that we might be holding on to today?
Well, that's a question each of us needs to ask ourselves. Are we clinging to beliefs or practices just because that's how it's always been done? Are we afraid to question the norms?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think this next idea is really interesting, too, because the source talks about idolatry, but not in the traditional sense.
Right. It goes beyond just worshiping statues.
Yeah. So what does idolatry mean in this context?
It's about anything that we elevate to a godlike status in our lives. Anything that takes precedence over our core values.
So it could be money, fame, power.
Exactly. Even certain ideologies.
So basically anything that we put on a pedestal above everything else.
Right. And when we do that, it creates an imbalance.
Like we're worshiping the wrong things.
Yeah. We lose sight of what truly matters.
So we need to be mindful of our modern day idols.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of heavy stuff, but there's also this thread of hope running through these stories.
There definitely.
Like even though societal collapse often starts with individual actions. Individual acts of goodness can also have a ripple effect.
Absolutely. The Qur'an is clear that widespread corruption often starts with small personal transgressions.
It's like a domino effect, right?
Exactly. One person's dishonesty inspires another and then another.
But the opposite can also happen.
It can.
One act of kindness can inspire another and another.
It's the butterfly effect, but for good.
I like that. So while we can't solve every problem in the world,
Right.
we can make a difference in our own little corner of it.
We can by examining our own choices and actions.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm feeling a mix of caution and optimism.
Yeah.
We've seen what can go wrong, but we've also seen the principles that can lead us toward a better future.
The principles of humility, honesty, gratitude, critical thinking.
Yeah, and the courage to challenge the status quo.
And ultimately, it comes down to individual responsibility.
Right.
The Qur'an teaches that we have the power to shape our own destiny.
So we have to learn from the past and make better choices in the present. Well, this has been an amazing journey through Quranic lessons from destroyed nations.
Yeah, it has.
And I really hope that everyone listening will take these lessons to heart,
Me too.
and use them to create a more just and compassionate world.
Absolutely, because ultimately we all have a role to play.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and keep seeking knowledge, keep growing, and keep making a positive impact on the world.